Welcome. You have just tuned into Elevated Resonance with Daniel. Celebrate a life worth living. Hi, I'm Daniel Rutschmann.
And this is Dr. Pat.
Together, we will explore some aspects of the scientific foundation of what it means to be a conscious creator and get inspired to take action on creating a life worth living. I bring a unique blend of expertise to my work, leveraging an in-depth knowledge of concepts in neuroscience and the science of resilience, as well as over 20 years of experience in the corporate world and of what makes organizations successful. Know that it is possible for you to create a life, a team, or an organization that you truly want, despite the circumstances in your outer world. Are you ready to embrace change and celebrate a life worth living? Then this show is for you. Elevated Resonance with Daniel starts now.
You just heard a little bit about who Daniel is, and you're going to hear a lot more. But the best way to hear about who he is, what he does, why he does it, is to talk about elevated resonance. This is of the place, the energy, the world you step into when you want to celebrate a life worth living. Daniel, it's so great that we're doing this show, right? I love that we're talking about the longing for elevated resonance, because that word, the longing, it's both emotional, but yet it has movement in it, right? People are going to want to know, what do we mean by elevated resonance? And welcome to celebrating this show with you.
Thank you, Dr. Pat. I'm very happy to be here. Well, elevated resonance, there's a lot in there. So it kind of started with me when I was really young. I was really drawn to things that just fit together. So I was very hands-on, like building little things, and I wanted things to be perfect and lining up and all of that. And little did I know that later on in life, when I started to learn about resonance and similar type of fields, that probably had a little bit something to do with that. I think the best way to explain what resonance is, because I think everybody knows what elevated means generally, but resonance, the easiest way I would say is, let's start with the definition, and please bear with me because we will dive a little bit into physics. So when you think of resonance, the definition is really that it's a natural phenomenon that occurs when two frequencies or even more are interacting within their systems or forces, and those ones are equal together. So if I have to say this in a different way, is you have different systems, they all have their own frequency, so to speak. And if the frequencies of those are lining up and interacting, then the result of that, if they are resonant, is that the system's amplitude and the system's frequency overall of all those different subsystems combined, they start vibrating at a higher amplitude. Here's a very simple example. If you take two guitars that are tuned exactly the same, and you pluck one string, let's say the A string, A major, on one guitar, on the other guitar, that exact same string will start vibrating, because there's a resonance of the frequencies. When we talk more about everyday use of the word resonance, then there's things where we say, oh, I'm really resonating with that person, or that piece of information is really resonating with me. What it means is there is like a energetic, or there is a match when it comes to frequencies, right? Often people ask me, so you talked about amplitude and frequencies. What is really the difference? And what does that really mean when we talk about resonance? So The easiest way to describe this, I find, is when we look at sound waves. So if you take a sound, a tone, and you look at a wave, how it goes, the frequency itself, that would represent the pitch of the sound, and the amplitude, which is the how high the wave goes, would represent the volume. So the louder I play, the higher the amplitude. The frequency would still be the same, but if I pluck a different string, then all of a sudden the pitch obviously would change in the frequency, right?
Yeah. And you know what I love about the way you're describing this is everybody can relate to it. You know, last night I'm watching the People Choice Awards and I'm watching Lenny Kravitz play, and I forgot, you know, how great he was. But I was also thinking about the show today and how what you're speaking about is so in our everyday life, and people don't realize it. It's right. I mean, what you were talking about, what you're describing is our everyday life, but we don't recognize it, and then we don't know how to optimize, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally. Yeah. I mean, if you go away from the scientific definition of resonance and look more into how that shows up in everyday life, particularly within ourselves, we have to understand that every system, including molecular system and particles, so our body, for example, all systems vibrate in a natural frequency. That's just how they vibrate, right? Naturally. And this natural frequency is called also a resonant frequency. So this is where resonance comes in. So let's talk about this a little bit more. So if we look at our body overall, it's a very dynamic system that has many, many, many different subsystems and various parts to it, right? Now, the natural state of every living system, if you look at the body overall or into the individual subsystems, is a resonant state. That is how biology and physics work. So now the more we increase or elevate the level of resonance within ourselves, the better we function overall, right? The healthier we are, the more we thrive, the better we can think and innovate and all those good things. So this is really at the heart of what we do at Elevated Resonance. We work primarily with organizations to help them transform their leaders and teams, because companies, they all struggle most of the time with collaboration, with people are not innovative enough or not productive or agile enough. But ultimately, what we achieve at the end as kind of like a side product, a side effect, is that people feel really fulfilled and they're thriving in their work. We also work with individuals when they approach us, and often what they tell me, well, I kind of feel stuck, or I'm not really happy about my career, where it's going, or where my life is going. And we basically apply the exact same principles, the exact scientific foundation, and help them then to truly unleash their full potential, right? So, and no worries, we're not trying to turn people into scientists, right? It's not like we just talk science all day. It's just very important, I think, for people to understand that we're not just working off a certain methodology or philosophy. Like what we really, the tools we use are scientifically based and proven and over many decades.
Yeah, people want to know that, because let's just stay with what you said about feeling stuck. When people enter that framework of feeling stuck, they don't usually have a way to put the pieces together to get to why that's happening or what is actually happening. So the way you're describing it, you know this. If you work with any team, you know that when something, let me use my language, something is off. And that off is what you just described. And a lot of times people don't understand, how did I get off to begin with? And here's where I am today. I was reading an article on Russell Wilson, quarterback for Denver, and the article said Russell will be out of the NFL next year. And you think, why? And it's exactly what you're describing. You know, he's not a bad quarterback, but what went on to put him at this place where this frequency, this resonance was so far off of who he was when he was in Seattle.
Yeah. Any team sport, right? You think about, I come from Germany, so I love soccer, right? You can have the top players in the world in the same team, and they might not perform at the optimal level. You often see this with teams that have all those great players, but if there's no resonance, if they're not working together and kind of working towards the same direction, right? Then it's not gonna work very well. And it's the same with organizations and teams and individuals that struggle in their life or in their relationships.
Yeah, I love the way you're describing this, especially for organizations, if I might say, because so often in organizations, they're looking for something that it's almost as if they're making a situation so complex without breaking down what you've just said. Do you know what I'm saying? So what you're doing here is you're giving them a framework. You're giving teams, you're giving organizations, you're giving individuals a framework. And once we have a framework like this and a level of understanding, and I know you're going to talk about this today, it's how do we put all the pieces of who we are as human beings together to make it work? Because I don't know about you. I don't know anybody that likes to stay stuck.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah, when we are not in flow, when we feel like nothing is working really well and it's not going the way I want, could be within a team, could be at home with our family, with our loved ones, with our friends. It's like, what is going on? So understanding what's underneath that. If a team doesn't collaborate very well, like what is underneath that? That's really where the resonance comes in.
Yeah. And, can we just say this for people that are listening? It's not just, we say team, but put yourself in your family environment. That's a team. So, we're really talking about all it takes is two people getting together, like the two guitars that you previously mentioned. And, what we have is something that's either going to be, to your words, flow or not. And often we know what both feel like, right? So we're not just talking about a mental thing here. We know when something is just not working right for us. Isn't that true?
Yeah. I know this very well from my own life. I know when my wife and I, when we are in resonance or not. That is, I know that. And then working together to come back to a resonant state as a couple or as a family.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really what it is about.
Yeah. And so, part of this, though, is also you're going to talk about coherence as well. And, let's talk about that for a minute, because now we're talking about when we do bring two people together, when we do understand some things. But there's something I love to say, and I love to talk about the fact that everything is energy. And yet at the same time, we're not quite sure what that means. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But everything is energy. And it doesn't matter if you're up for the day or down for the day. But can you talk about this? Because I don't believe all energy is alike. And I think that's where we get a little bit hung up.
Yeah, totally. People often say like everything is energy, everything is frequency, right? Well, what does that really mean? It's when we look at it, and this is like well known for quite a while, this is not new, is that everything literally is an energetic state. Even matter. If we look at matter, everything we can touch and is physical that we can actually perceive with our five senses, that's the slowest form of energy. So the slowest frequency. When you look at an atom or multiple atoms, how they, when the energy field around it, when it vibrates, right? It vibrates or oscillates in a certain frequency. Two atoms can only couple together to maybe form a molecule or whatever else ultimately matter if the oscillation of the neurons and electrons slows down, and then there is a positive and a negative, and then they hang on to each other. If it oscillates fast on a fast frequency, they can't hold together. And that's how matter becomes what we perceive as matter. It's the slowest frequency. And now you mentioned coherence.
Yes.
So that is a term like coherence, resonance. What is it? I find a lot that it takes a little bit to make that very clear, right? They are not too far off. They are related, but they're very different things. So everything is frequency and energy. Every frequency you can express or visualize as a wave, right? So that's a very common way how we work with frequency, how we measure it, how we plot it out on a chart, etc. If you look at a wave, if you take a sine wave, everybody has probably seen this in school. It's like a very harmonic wave that goes up and down in the same pattern, super smooth. It's very clean. That is considered a coherent wave. Now, in everyday life, when you look at things and you measure that, the wave does not always look like that. It looks more like a jacketed line going up and down in very erratic ways. That would be an incoherent wave. Now, if you think about resonance, for that to happen, two systems or two forces or two frequencies, the waves have to kind of match, right? They have to line up. I pluck one string, there's only one other string vibrating on the other guitar because those two vibrate at the same frequency. Now, if I take, let's say, a speaker and play the same pitch, so let's say the A major, but it's really like distorted signal, like there's a lot of static on the line. The guitar string of major A would probably not start vibrating because there is no resonance because the waves look very different, right? And so in physics, when we talk about coherence, it is really defined as the potential of two waves to interfere, which really means the more coherent, the smoother the wave is, both waves, the more likely they are to interfere. And when they interfere and are coherent and resonant, then it leads the two amplitudes, so the two mountains, right, the peaks of a wave, when they line up, so you have two peaks above each other, they add up and create a higher amplitude, which means if we talk about sound waves, it would the volume would increase, right? So that is a fascinating thing. But now, okay, let's put the science aside since we got that out of the way. And now let's look at the context of real life, right?
Yeah.
Our body, for example. Now, as we talked about before, the body is made up of a lot of subsystems. There's many, many systems, and they all together create what we call our body, right? As we talked about earlier, every system, every one of those subsystems has a natural resonant frequency. That's why I always say resonance is the natural state of being. And our bodies naturally gravitate towards that because they're made like that. That's often also referred to as homeostasis, or you're in balance, in a balanced inner state, right? So people probably have often heard the word homeostasis. Now, through the influence of, let's say, an external force, an event in the outer environment, you could interfere with a particular system as your body or subsystem, and then that system could fall out of its resonant state, which basically it falls out of the state of homeostasis, out of balance, right? And that is, for example, what happens when we expose ourselves to stress. When we are in stress, what that does to us, usually, it knocks us out of balance. You know, we kind of more snappy. We kind of like in a rush. We like get more impatient.
Yeah.
So, and it has to do with when we look at stress, really, let me quickly throw that
Yeah,
in.
yes.
There's 3 different types of stresses or stressors. You could say there's physical, right? You have an injury or a fall. There's chemical stress, which is pollutants, pesticides, viruses, etc. And then there is emotional stress. For some people, it's the mortgage, or it's the relationship, or it's parenting. And now all of those stresses can knock us out of homeostasis and balance. Now, interesting question that I usually ask people is, what type of stress, Dr. Pat, do you think is causing the most problems for people? Physical, chemical, or emotional?
I think it's emotional.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do. I ran into it this weekend. And, the good news is I prepare for these shows. So I already was able to figure out what the heck I was doing because I knew we were going to talk about this. But it's so important to know this so that when you feel it, when you're in the middle of it, you say, oh, here I go. I am really going to be off here. I need to, in my case, I needed to hit a pause button. And it was a silly thing, but I was responsible for an 87th birthday party at my coach's at ping pong, table tennis, right?
Oh, wow.
And it was one of those things where you plan it and it turned out wonderfully. But I didn't order the pizza with the Hawaiian pizza.
Oops.
Who knew that would become a thing? And then I let it become a thing. And then I unlet it become a thing. And I think this is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
We can let things escalate to the point by which we don't even know how to get back from where we went.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing. It's very important to differentiate between a stressor that is influencing me, right?
Yeah.
And my own stress response. Because I cannot control the stressor, right? If I'm driving behind a car that puts out a lot of fumes, I might be able to close the window or something, or I'm standing at the street or wildfires, there's smoke. But what I can do is I can influence and regulate my stress response.
Yeah.
Or prevent that from happening. So if someone yells at me, I don't need to yell back.
There you go.
I can, but I don't have to.
But see, if we understand this, if we understand everything you've just said right to this point, that's the key. Because what happens when we match that frequency, right? We're going to take a short break here. But what we're really talking about is if we understand this, and not just the science, but understand the nature of it, then we can do some things differently. I'm not saying this is easy, Daniel.
Oh, no, it's not. It's not.
But it's certainly easier than letting something escalate, something like Hawaiian pizza escalate. Before we take a short break, can you just take a minute and let everybody know where they can find out more, how they can find out more about not just understanding this, but taking action, perhaps for their organization? We have a lot of folks that listen to the show and they're managers. They work in organizations. Some of them own the organization. But the point is, this is so people can try to do something very different, to learn something that could cause increase in revenue, sales teams getting along better, employee managerial relationships better. And then you don't take that stuff home with you, and then your family life's better, right?
Exactly. Absolutely. The easiest way to find out more about that is just reach out to me. And the easiest way to do that is just go to my website, which is elevatedresonance.com. Very easy, straightforward. And then you can just go to the contact tab that's on there and then just send me a note, and then I will return, or someone from my team will, but we will be able then to have a chat.
Beautiful. Now, here's the key. We're going to take a short break. because this is the key. This is what I love about what Daniel's talking about, what he does. It doesn't matter what situation you're in front of. It doesn't matter how stressed you are. Doctor's visits, they will put you through the roof. So interesting. You go to the doctor's visit and they do your blood pressure and they wonder why your blood pressure is up, right? I mean, the doctor visit alone. But when we come back, the question really is, how do we manage this? And what I mean by manage is, do you even know that you might be able to, if you learn this, to elevate your own resonance? That's what Daniel's going to talk about. You know, this is not just about the science. It's about so you can take something within and change the way you react, respond, elevate your resonance. And what do you think your life would be like if you did that? I'm not going to talk about that. Daniel is. Let's take a short break. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody, welcome back. You are listening. You're listening. That now I just created a whole new word for Daniel. That is such an interesting word. Listening, right here. You heard it on the show. Listening is like taking elevated resonance, putting it together. And by the way, feel free to use that. Listening. Yeah. I love it. Elevated resonance. Daniel, I want to mention again, you know, we're talking about a lot of things here, but this is really about solution and getting people the kind of help they need to create this change. Again, tell us your website, the best place for people to go to find out more about you.
Yeah, it's very straightforward, elevatedresonance.com. And then they can read through some of the information that's on there, obviously, or can just go to the contact page and just reach out to us. And we will get back to them and then hop on a call.
I love it. Okay. Why are we talking about this? Because you see, don't we want to elevate? Don't we want to elevate our resonance? Don't we want to do something, then have a hair-pulling event or response or reaction that we can't take back? And we are in a world now that we're under tremendous amount of stressors. And, you know, I use that term loosely because I don't know how to define it. With the world of social media, nobody really planned for us to be where we are. However, it's the norm. And so I want to ask you, can we elevate our resonance? And if so, how?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so important, as you said, especially these days. I read a study a while ago, and that was actually from the 80s. In the 80s, they did a study on a large network of patients going to doctors, and it was between 60 and 90% of doctor visits were related to emotional stress in the 80s. Now think about what that looks like today. I don't even want to know. That's emotional stress. It's not they coming in because they broke their leg or they pulled something. No, it's emotional stress. So this is super, super important. And unfortunately today, we don't learn this in school, that stress response, that survival mechanism, that survival system that kicks in and knocks us out of balance. You know, back in the days, long time ago, if you were out in the fields and, you know, a wild animal starts chasing you, you run for your life. That's what that system is designed for. And it has served us so well as a human species. Otherwise, we wouldn't be around anymore. Now, nowadays, it's often, we are not aware of it, that the survival response, the stress response kicks in. It could be a coworker sitting next to us that is that wild animal that is chasing us down the field. We don't think about it that way, but our body responds the exact same way, and we are not aware of it. We are not even aware of it. And that's why I think we have such a high level of, you know, emotional stress that people dealing with, because nobody learns how to regulate that and how to deal with that. Right.
And our bodies take that all in too. I mean, you know, if we truly understood exactly, that's why you're doing the series, because this is so important. You know, when you look at the studies that people have now done on people that are living to 120 years old, right? And you think about, well, what is that? Everybody wants to think, well, maybe it's their food. Well, maybe it is. But let's look at their lifestyle. Let's look at the way and the degree by which they're able to go through their day without going from 0 to 120 in the emotional measurement scale, right? But this is what you're saying. This is something that these key drivers of physiology take their toll on us.
Yeah. I mean, it's once I find when people learn the tools, how to do that, super powerful, because all of a sudden they know I'm not the victim anymore. I'm not getting agitated and frustrated and angry because someone else is doing something to me. I let that person take my free will away and dictate how I think and feel about the situation. There's a lot of freedom that comes with those tools and empowerment. So, and ultimately it's about bringing our systems back into balance and homeostasis. And, you know, we all react to certain events. The question is not to react. It's more about how long are you going to react?
Yeah.
How quickly it's like, oh, something is triggering me. And then know what to do to change that state, to not let it impact you even further. So when we talk about bringing ourselves back into balance, we have to bring in the nervous system, which controls every part of the body. Now, one very important part of our nervous system is the autonomic nervous system. And it's called autonomic, which also means basically automatic, because it controls 90% of our bodily functions. You know, you don't think about your heart beating. Something in your body, some intelligence is controlling your heart rate. You can intervene, right, if you know, like breathing techniques and things like that. But most of the time you don't think about it, especially, or breathing. You don't think about it. It happens automatically. When we let ourselves get stressed or get knocked out of balance, the autonomic nervous system gets knocked out of balance. That's really what it comes down to. And that regulates every part of the body. So then the body gets out of balance, right? In one organization I admire dearly is the Heart Math Institute. I can't speak
amazing.
highly.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah.
The work they have done over decades, they have over 300 peer-reviewed studies. And this is one of their key areas they're looking into. And they found that our emotions are the key drivers of our physiology, and that they highly influence the regulation of our autonomic nervous system. So with that, it's so important and so essential for us to learn how to regulate our emotional states. And with that, we also directly influence the level of coherence in our body. And with that, create more resonance within ourselves, elevate our resonance, basically, right? And this is one of the most important factors, the most important areas that contributes to what we also call resilience, right? And resilience you could define as the capacity to prepare for, recover from, and adapt in the face of stress or challenges or any adversities in our life. That's resilience. So if we learn how to regulate our emotional states, we get our autonomic nervous system into sync. We save a lot of energy that we otherwise just deplete out from a, unbalanced nervous system, and then create a much more fulfilling inner state where we thrive. All of a sudden we get great ideas at work. We can collaborate, we can innovate with each other. We understand someone comes to us and we see the person is agitated, something happens. We feel compassion for them because we have been in the same place, right? And we have that intelligence, that emotional intelligence to be aware of that and not let that us react, because that's the least the the last thing that person needs.
You know what I love about this? I have to tell you this because the word resilience, you know this, both of us do organizational work, and you'll know the word resilience it pops up everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
What's missing from the conversation on resilience is resonance. I think it's missing. And what I mean by that is how often do you hear how important resilience is over and over and over again? But there's like this gap between it's really important. How do I get there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, oh, just be resilient. Not really. You have to learn a few things. And this is the gap I think you're filling with this, I believe. What? Tell me if I'm off on that.
Totally. It's having a more resilient workforce makes it so much easier to adapt, to change, to move in a different direction, right? But how do we get to resilience? And that's where resonance and coherence comes in, and emotions and self-regulation. But the work we do at Elevated Resonance, we do not just teach people how to self-regulate. That is a super important piece that everybody, that's like the basics, so to speak. But often resilience is needed, especially in organizational settings, because the company wants to change. The strategy changes, the market changes, the economy changes. There's constantly change. And we naturally don't want to change. The body and our mind, we like things just to be as they are. If everything works fine, why should we change, right? But so we work with people and with organizations as well to help them understand the underlying concepts or principles, also in science, like neuroscience, for example, of what it truly means to change and how to create not just desirable changes, but also sustainable changes, right? And that's where, in addition to the emotions, which are super critical, what also comes into the picture is how we think and how we act, how we behave. So those three go kind of hand in hand, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And this is why this is so important, because a lot of times when we talk about things, and this, whether we're in organizations or not, I've heard people, coaches talk about resilience and then have one of their clients ask a question and they're not able to connect the dots. And I think what you're doing here today is this is a blueprint. You're helping us understand the blueprint to get from a scenario in life, whatever that is for somebody, where they saw themselves have a reaction to something. And if they'd have known this, known what to do about it, known how to act differently, the outcome would have been extremely different. And I think that's what we're talking about, because Daniel, I don't know about you, and I know you're going to talk about this next, is if we don't learn this and we step out on that thin ice, and it's the thin ice that we're talking about that could damage a relationship, just increase mistrust. I mean, there's so many outcomes from this that if we don't understand how this works and are not able to include it in our lives, our own interchanging pattern, we're not going to get to that thing you said before, which is flow, right?
Totally. I mean, it's such a fundamental knowledge these days, right? It's not just to know the what, like what to do. It's also how to do it. Like it's really how to apply that. And that's with the work we do at Elevated Resonance. It's really about creating outcome, not just come in and tell people all those fancy concepts, how resonance and coherence works, and here is how self-regulation works. No, we work with them to really implement it and support people on that journey, because it's a learning process, and we will come up against ourselves naturally, because we're not just letting ourselves react the way we usually do. So we are changing, we wiring something different in our brain, and we choose consciously to make a different choice in those moments. So
Let's talk about the many ways, because we're only giving people a couple of ideas here. But when you look at flow, and I had the privilege of studying with the gentleman that did a lot of research on flow, and of course at the time I was there, I didn't even understand really what he was talking about. Now fast forward today and I get it. However, we're talking about something that people go through every day in their lives. They don't understand or realize that there are things they can learn to make to shift a small degree one way or the other makes a major difference. It's like walking in the desert. You think you're walking a straight line, but if you're off to a degree, by the time you get 10 miles down the road, you are nowhere even close to where you thought you were going to go. And if you would just go through, I mean, people may be thinking, well, is this going to help me in my relationship, Daniel? Is this going to help me when I go on that job interview? Is it? Yes. I'll tell you right now, folks, if you want to call Daniel, if you want to get prepared for a job interview, but give us an idea of all of the areas that this can affect people.
Yeah. So when I explain people like how we work, I usually start with the scientific foundation. So where we draw all those concepts from. And there is neuroscience, for example, right, which is now more and more used very broadly. And I really like seeing that. So with neuroscience, there come things like neuroplasticity and epigenetics, things people might have heard of, biochemistry. So we pull different insights from those fields of science. On the other side, we also look at not just the neuroscience, which is a lot about the brain. We also look at the neurophysiology. I sometimes call it the science of resilience, which is really the science of the heart, where we look at the heart as well. And we talked about emotions, right? And electrophysiology, where we draw insights from the fact that we are electromagnetic beings. Everything that is, well, we talked about this before, everything is energy, everything is frequency, and frequency carries information. So everything, if you look at that, emits electromagnetic field. Every frequency does. So we as human beings do that too. And that's why resonance, also how we resonate. You go on a date, you resonate with a person. You go on another date, you don't resonate with a person. There is not a match in the electromagnetic field, which reads our resonance state, for example, just on a side note. So those are some of the fields we draw insights from. And then we apply that in a wide range of aspects of life, right? So we look at communication, how we self-regulate. We talked about that before. Very well-studied, proven tools of how to do that. Collaboration, how do we collaborate? Which goes along with communication. So when we do leadership development, right, with organizations, and let's say one of the topics we work with leaders about or talents or employees on is like how to give feedback, how to give effective feedback. From my perspective is, if we just go with a standard how to give feedback framework, people don't understand that behind all that is, if I give feedback, I need to first of all understand, especially if it's sensitive feedback, critical feedback, I need to be aware of my own emotional states and also the person that's sitting across from me. And so that's why we use those scientific insights to really make this super pragmatic and applicable. Not just teaching about here's a framework, how you give feedback. No, how do you show up as the person giving feedback? And how do you show up as the person receiving the feedback? And what do you communicate then in that conversation? And once they understand all that, then it's a whole different game, right? So with that, we also, of course, look into organizational culture. That's probably, we can talk another hour about that piece.
And we really should, but yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah. The organizational culture and how it impacts business performance. It's not just the strategy. In fact, I would say that culture is way more determining what business outcomes you get.
It's so funny you're bringing it up because, you and I may have similar organizational consulting backgrounds in some way, right? And one of the things that, about culture is we tend to be, what's the word? We tend to be so abstract when the reality is it's not abstract.
Mm-hmm.
But, yes, there are things like at the tip of the iceberg, that's all you see. But you see, when we're talking about culture, what you're talking about is if we can elevate resonance in a culture, it has many layers to it. Mm-hmm. And the layers it has to it are going to identify the places in the culture which cause a culture to go sideways. For example, gossip. Gossip. I don't care what organization you're in, the G word is the quickest way to really create divides. Now, let's go through this because we probably will do a show on culture because culture is so important now. We don't have time for dissonance in organizations now.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Do you?
No. I mean, to me, it's the main pillar that influences business performance. If often we have as a company, as the leaders, as the board, we come up with a great strategy. If this culture doesn't align, it's not going to go anywhere. One of the big famous business strategy and business consultants of all times, Peter Drucker, he said once, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
I heard him say it personally. I went to that school.
Nice.
Right. But then you have to listen to why he says that too, right? So tell us why, because this is what you're doing here with elevated resonance is exactly it.
Well, based on that, it's very short. What I tell people usually, you want to change your company, you want to transform your organization, you got to change the culture. Because where you are today is because of the culture of how it is. And of course, also the strategy that goes along with it, but they go hand in hand. So the culture, you can quickly draft up a new strategy, but change the culture, that's a different animal. And if you want to change a culture, you got to change individuals. It all starts on an individual level as well. So if people have the same language, they understand, I gotta, understand that I'm in a balanced state when I go into tough meetings. I need to take care of myself, and if things go a little bit sideways, then maybe I take a minute to use some of the tools that I have learned to get my nervous system back in balance. So energy management is another important piece, that leads into that, and stress management, overall leadership, like how do we lead? There's now actually a lot like, what is it called? Conscious leadership is now a term. Like who would have thought like 10 years ago? Of course, emotional intelligence and, just the flexibility, that adaptability of teams and organizations.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's all about to be fulfilled. If the people coming to your organizations, or if and even at home, a family, right? If you come home and you're happy, you're looking forward because it's an awesome environment. It's a great relationship you have. If you go to work because you love your coworkers, how they treat you, how you treat them, there's collaboration, even though we might have very different opinions about things. But you thrive, you look forward to it. So that's where authentic happiness comes from. That's where, and this is how we create a life worth living. That's one of the things I always say, like, live a life that's worth living.
Yeah. I so love this. And I can't wait till we do the next show because, we're going to really touch on some things that will help people. And one of the things that you said, I just want to just thank you for. You see, sometimes we're not going to agree, but you said something earlier in the show. It's not the outcome. It's not the what. It's how you get there. In the research study on organizations, there's a construct called procedural justice. really fancy word, but what does it mean? It means like how you get there. How are you going to get from the place that you are today to change the culture? Banging on a table may not get you there.
Yeah.
But you and I know we work with some leaders. Daniel, thank you so much. One more time, how do we find out more about you? And I'd love to know your closing message. I'd love to know what you'd like to leave us with today. And thank you so much for this.
Yeah. So again, how to find me, just go to elevatedresonance.com. You can reach out there on the contact form, and someone from us will get back to you, and then we will hop on a chat and have an awesome conversation about whatever leads you or brings you to us, right? And I love talking to people. I love having genuine conversations, right? When I engage with people, even with leaders, I'm not trying to sell them anything. For me, it's really, I love to hear what people are going through and what they think about certain aspects of life. And then we have this awesome conversation. I learn so much from people we're working with. So I just love having genuine conversations with people. So feel free to reach out.
Daniel, thank you so much. Any hint on what we're going to talk about next time, or you want to just think about that a little bit?
Let's think about it. There's so many different topics, but I want to make it in a way where we're not just jumping from one thing into another, where it kind of builds on each other. So
I love it.
We don't lose people, right? So,
yeah. And I want to just end up by telling everyone, this is what Daniel's talking about. And this way to celebrate a life worth living is what this is about. You heard science today, you heard examples today, but the end game is to celebrate a life worth living. That's what he is the expert in. That's what his team does. And that life worth living is in your organization as well. Please don't separate them. It's extremely difficult. This is where we need to go in order for us to manage the new energies of the world we're in now. Daniel, thank you so much for everything.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Pat.
All right, everybody, we'll see you next time.
You have been listening to Elevated Resonance with Daniel. Celebrate a life worth living. I'm Daniel, and along with Dr. Pat, you have been learning some of the key aspects of how to navigate towards your vision of the future by creating and living your best self every day. Tune in every first Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time or 2 p.m. Eastern Time to become better in coping with the demands and challenges of everyday life. For more information about this show and how I can support you, visit my website, elevatedresonance.com.